Good evening, everybody. I've been asked to tell you that there is an overflow room in 116 if needed, but right now it looks like there are still some seats. If people come in and don't have a place to sit, please do maybe bunch up a little bit. But we've got a really great turnout tonight, and I'm looking forward to it. My name is Michael Kulikowski. I'm a professor of history and classics, and I'm the head of the Department of History here at Penn State. On behalf of everybody associated with the department and with the Penn State College of Liberal Arts, thanks for joining us this evening. We're thrilled to have Ms. Tyas, Dr. Edwards, and Mr. Smith here to share their thoughts on one of the most seminal sports and political moments of the 20th century, and the impact that moment continues to have on us half a century later. Now, as it turns out, I understand that we have at least one more Olympian with us in the audience this evening. Jane Bachman-Brown, could you please stand for a moment? Jane was a member of the gold medal-winning 400-meter freestyle team in women's swimming at Mexico City in 1968, and was also a bronze medalist in the individual 200-meter freestyle. In 1972 at Munich, she was tri-captain of the women's swim team and part of the team that broke the world record in the 400-meter freestyle relay. We're delighted that you could be here with us tonight, Jane. Thank you very much. So over the course of the past year and this coming one, the College of the Liberal Arts and the Department of History have embarked on an initiative entitled Moments of Change, Remembering '68. The purpose of doing so has been to look back at the significant events that took place in that year so we can develop a better understanding of and a better appreciation for how those events changed the world then and have helped shape the world we live in today. As I said at the outset, tonight we look back on one of the most influential moments in sports and politics from the 20th century. We get to hear firsthand how that moment came about, what the reaction was in the moment, and what impact that moment has had on us in months, years, and decades since. Who knew how loudly raising a gloved fist in silence could speak? I think we're about to find out. So at this time, I'd like to introduce tonight's moderator, Amira Rose Davis. Amira is an assistant professor of history and women's gender and sexuality studies here at Penn State, and someone who has played not just a big role, but certainly the biggest role in tonight's presentation. So Amira, thank you for helping us make this happen. I'd also like to thank the John Curley Center for Sports Journalism and the Department of African American Studies for co-hosting tonight's presentation with the Department of History. And with that, I'll turn things over to Amira to introduce our panelists and outline tonight's format for you. Thanks very much.
I'm very excited. Before we start, I think that it's really important to also thank all the hidden labor that some of you don't see. I have an amazing team, so Kevin, Conway, and Sherry, and Chantel, and Kathy, and everybody who has done all of the little things to make this happen, thank you very much as well. So welcome, yes, hi. So welcome again, and I'm pleased and thrilled to be joined by three guests who frankly don't need much of an introduction. So I'll keep my comments brief and then allow you to meet them yourselves. I'm thrilled to be joined by gold medalist and Olympian Tommie Smith, multiple Olympian and gold medalist as well, Wyoming Tyas, and the godfather of sociology of sport, Dr. Harry Edwards. Please join me. Welcome. So I would love to start by allowing each of you to take about 5 minutes and talk about '68, the legacy of '68, and introduce yourselves today. You look like you want to start.
You're going to start.
Well, let
let me try to put some kind of historical perspective on that movement. In 1968, I was writing my dissertation at Cornell University while I was organizing the Olympic Project for Human Rights and running all over the country from the FBI and a number of other law enforcement agencies. And a prime thesis of my dissertation was that sport inevitably recapitulates the structure and dynamics of human and institutional relationships in society, and the ideological definitions that rationalize and justify those relationships. What that translates into in common everyday English is that you can no more have a non-racial, non-racist sports institution in a racist society than a chicken can lay a duck egg. So at the end of the day, there's an organic relationship between what's going on in sports and what's going on in society. But more than that, because of the platform and so forth that sport avails athletes, developments in society tend to frame up and to inform their vision and understanding of where they are, their connection to the masses of people who don't have that form, and therefore some obligation to participate in the struggles of the masses in order to broaden the basis of democratic participation in American society. Going all the way back to Jack Johnson, to Jesse Owens, Joe Louis, who all, because of abject segregation in this society, had to achieve their greatest applause and reputations in the international arena. Jack Johnson beat Tommy Burns, a Canadian, in Australia for the heavyweight championship. Jesse Owens at the Munich Games in Germany. Joe Louis knocking out Max Schmeling, all international arena developments, along with Paul Robeson, who, although he was an American football player and baseball player, he was able to sing and star in movies and plays and so forth in theaters in Europe long before he could sing from the stage of Carnegie Hall in this country. It was because of abject segregation that framed up their struggle that they were in that arena, in the international arena. The second wave of black athletes was Jackie Robinson and that whole group, whose emphasis was not on international achievement and legitimacy, but on access. So you got Jackie Robinson and Larry Doby in baseball. You got Kenny Washington and Woody Strode, Marion Motley and Bill Willis in football. You got Chuck Cooper and Earl Lloyd in basketball. They all struggled for access. That was the second wave. Then the third wave was this guy here, along with the godfather of the activism of the 1960s, Muhammad Ali, John Carlos, Bill Russell, Jim Brown, Arthur Ashe, most certainly Kurt Flood. That was the third wave, and they struggled for dignity and respect. And then now we're in a fourth wave, where the struggle is for the exercise of power, where a LeBron James can go to ESPN and say, we got something we want to say during your premier awards ceremony, and ESPN's response was, how much time you need? The same with most certainly Steph Curry, when the head of Under Armour made some comments about our president. Steph Curry didn't agree with it. He got on the telephone. The next day, the head of Under Armour took out a full-page ad apologizing, saying that he had been misstated, that he had misstated his point, and that what he said had been taken out of context, which is the equivalent of Charles Barkley when he was asked about a statement in his autobiography, said, I was misquoted. So that was the exercise of power. So what happened in 1968 was in the flow of developments. And already, well, this side of the sports political horizon is a fifth wave of athlete activism, which perhaps we'll get a chance to talk about in a few minutes.
So, Tommy, can you take us?
No. Well, you know, what has been said, I am a wave of something. Hi, y'all. And moving forward from that, you know, these wrinkles are like a tossed in the ocean. The wrinkles come to the banks, and you see the need for continual rocks being thrown so the wrinkles can be seen. You know, and I was one of those wrinkles. Of course, at San Jose State, my dad told me, boy, if you want to make something, you got to get out of these cotton fields in Fresno, California, and go to school. I mean, I was already in school, and he didn't go, but and do something with yourself. I thought I was doing pretty good picking 300 pounds of cotton a day. You know, that was $9, $3 a hundred. I mean, this is my background in coming to San Jose, in meeting people, and doing what I thought necessary to highlight a program, to highlight a development that had already been sounded, and I was just a person who pitched in and carried 11 more records with me, and that was used to promote a platform that was used to accentuate the need for black athletes to become involved in a social change that no one else could do but us. On the problem beforehand, it's all these waves you saw earlier. Dr. Harry Edwards spoke of earlier, platforms they had, visibility they had, but the Olympic Project for Human Rights, they did not have. This was done by the brainchild of that, Dr. Harry Edwards, and I volunteered in to do what I could do with what I had to promote, and that involvement, that promotion was the victory stand in '68. Now, there's a lot of things about that victory stand that probably will come up as we go on a quick note of that people didn't know, or why the scarf, or why the shoes, why the bowed head, why the fist, was it Black Power salute, was it militancy, and another thing that you mentioned earlier, I forgot, what 74 years old, I kind of forget things.
Well, that's okay, man. I'm with you now.
Okay, all right.
I forgot what it was I said.
So we're here to invite contributions of voices. I see a lot of good-looking voices out there. And congratulations, Olympian. Where are you? I can't see out there. Well, there you are. That's your hand. Congratulations to you. Okay. All right.
Well, thank you.
Okay.
Our fellow teammate, yes.
Yeah.
For me, I guess I was in one of those waves. I guess the fourth wave with Tommy. I guess my perspective would come from a women's perspective, and from black women especially. The whole boycott and the Human Rights Project, were we involved? Yes, in some ways. But the key to me was that human rights was everybody deserved human rights. And I grew up in the South in the 50s and the 60s, and my parents made sure that I understood that I was a person, I had human rights, and you had to do your best at all times. And now sometimes doing your best may not let you win or be the champion, or people won't hear you or see you. I know in '68, where as far as the women are concerned, to honor Tommy and John Carlos, the women on the 4x100 relay team dedicated their medals to them in support of what they were doing. We, not only just us, but there were other athletes that we don't hear about that also was a part of that whole movement. But because of what Carlos and Tommy did, a lot of that, it didn't get televised. They only talked about those things, but the movement also had a lot of other people supporting them. For example, you had a lot of the guys wearing either berets, black socks. The women wore black shorts, and some wore black socks. And by the relay team dedicating their medals, that let you know that we were in support of what was going on. Although, that was never televised, that was never said. And here it is 50 years later, probably some of you that probably are just finding this out, that that these kinds of things happen. So the movement started a lot. I look at it as that it kind of broke open things, and from there until now, we still have a lot of work to do. And I think one reason we're here on this panel is to talk about some of the work that we need to be done. And for me, one of the big things for me is that the recognition for women. And I think in this day and time, we're talking about it, but we need to do more than talk, and we need to do more. And I come from a position where I grew up with 3 older brothers, and I remember my father always saying to them, they would say, oh, girls shouldn't be doing this, and girls should, and he would say, look, is she good? She's better than you guys, she could beat you. And what you want on your team is your best player. And the best player, it doesn't matter whether it's a girl or a boy. But, you know, and that's how I grew up. I always wanted to give my best and be the best, do the best that I can do and be appreciated for the best that I can do, whether it was when I was a little kid and as a grown woman now. So.
So can we take a minute and, for folks who don't know, define what the Olympic Project for Human Rights was about, and perhaps give, you can take us through what all the symbolism was that went into the protest as well.
The Olympic Project for Human Rights was named the Olympic Project for Human Rights rather than the Olympic Project for Civil Rights as a result of some conversations that I had, some awareness that that evolved when I was writing my master's thesis at Cornell on the Black Muslim family. One of the groups that I tapped in order to get some idea about the values and sentiments of the Black Muslim families versus lower class Christian families was Malcolm X's group. That was at that time organizing the Organization for Afro-American Unity in New York City. So I would go down to New York City, talk to people down there, even got to meet Malcolm very briefly. And one of the things that he said was that we have to move beyond civil rights to human rights, because as long as we're dealing with civil rights, we're constricted to the laws, the procedures, the processes of the United States. We have to talk about human rights, and he had actually planned to go before the United Nations and make a case for the violation of black people's human rights in this country as a result of what was happening in the South, with dogs being sicked on women and children, old folks being dribbled down the sidewalk with fire hoses like they were basketballs, the lynchings that had taken place going all the way back to Emmett Till and Mac Parker and some of the other black people who were lynched. He said these are human rights issues, not civil rights issues, because the government in many instances is complicit in some of the things that are going on. And when you get to the Deep South, the government is the one that is responsible for what's going on. So now we must talk about human rights. Well, Malcolm was assassinated on February 21st, 1965, and he never got a chance to implement that. But one of the things that I realized after completing my master's thesis was I noticed a distinction between lower class Christian Negroes and black Muslims when I asked them about who their favorite athletes were. Lower class Christians universally said Jackie Robinson. Black Muslims said Muhammad Ali. That was a split that led me to believe that there was something going on there of a political nature. So when I began to look into it, it became very, very clear to me that the International Olympic Games are the second most political international forum outside of the United Nations itself. We might not be able to get to the podium of the United Nations, but we could sure in the hell get to the podium of the International Olympic Games. And that was where I determined that we would make the statement. And so what came to be the name of the movement was the Olympic Project for Human Rights, not the Olympic Project for Civil Rights. Let me say one last thing. Lady, it may have escaped the media what happened with you and Lee Evans and everybody else down at Mexico City. But it didn't escape me, it didn't escape Ken Noel, it didn't escape a lot of people who was organizing the Olympic Project for Human Rights. As far as Tommie Smith and John Carlos, not only, first of all, Tommie Smith is the greatest sprinter that the world has ever seen. I told somebody this morning, this is a different division. This is, I mean, pound for pound, this is the greatest sprinter the world has ever seen. Somebody asked me a while back if I thought Tommie could beat Usain Bolt, and I said, of course. I mean, because Tommie ran as fast as he needed to. Usain Bolt ran as fast as he could, and that's a huge difference. But these athletes from 1968 were not only members of the greatest track and field team, Olympic team, that the United States has ever fielded. but also some of the most courageous, informed, and committed athletes in American history. To understand what John and Tommy and the other athletes, simply by virtue of being black, went through in Mexico City, and what a lot of them went through when they got home, simply because they were black Olympians from the 1968 team. You have to understand the level of sacrifice and commitment that they took. You are looking at, it's very, very seldom, everybody, great is one of the words that is way overused in American lexicon and language. But you are tonight in the company of greatness when you look at what they accomplished, gold medals, and then to make the statement that they did to such an extent that 50 years later, we're still talking about it. That's important.
Yes.
50 years, half a century. Mm-hmm. And I'm still chewing. Numbers are mightily important to me. Two numbers, I was sitting thinking some weeks ago, in fact, two numbers. And I want you in your mind, silently, of course, because everybody can't talk, especially at the same time. The number 5053, okay? And 1962, I believe, correct me, Doc, if I'm wrong, Brown versus the Board of Education.
54. 54. Yeah, 1954. Brown versus Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas.
Yeah, Topeka, Kansas. And
Linda Brown.
Yeah.
Who just passed away.
Yeah, who just passed away, yeah. So history's still moving. And it really arouses my intellect, which ain't very much, about the intriguing of ideas to motivate the thought process of the human being. You know, the brain we have is a hard drive. And this is one reason I like to talk to the high school students or even the pre-high school, because they have blank hard drives. And I can talk, and they might not know what I'm saying, but they'll remember it, and they'll click on it one day and say, oh, I've heard this. You know, this is remuneration of thought which will bring about change. And do you see it today? You certainly do. And a lot of people don't like what they see, but that's what's happening, because there are those in the background before did things to arouse the thought process. Now, we're not dealing directly with 68 now, because that's dealing with me. We're dealing with what I did to encourage the thought process ongoing. Did anybody realize what 5053 is? That is the number of Rosa Parks' jail tag. 5053, so don't forget that. I sure hope it's not 5059. Okay, it's all right, brother.
Well, okay, just stick with that.
Okay, stick with that one, you know. But that's important to me. I'm going to stop it there, because I know we want to get off in 268 and do more talk.
No. Well, how about this is what we do. Can you walk us through the symbolism that you intended, and then we can do your reaction, and we'll do.
It was academia for me, because I had to deal with a thought of being forever or in perpetuity, to make as sure as possible that it would be remembered, but I had to have a platform. I had one to work, to move things in a formative position forward to get there. But I had to win races, I had to go to class, I had to deal with this guy's telling me, come over to my dorm telling me sometimes, Smith, where's your books, you know? So I had mentors, but I wasn't a very top student. I didn't have the okay to study in high school, because I had no mentors. You can't face. It's kind of hard to find a mentor chasing jackrabbits down in the morning. You know what jackrabbits are. You wouldn't know what I mean.
Yeah.
You know.
We used to eat them.
Yeah, that's right. And so that would buy. Now, quickly moving forward, the bare feet represented quickly what I was thinking now. Represented slavery. Represented bare feet, nothing, very little, bare feet. The bowed head prayer. Deacon and all this good stuff of being on Christian experience and prayer move things, and the fist was power. So there are those people who look at Tommy Smith on the victory and say, oh, he's a black power, he's a Panther. I mean, I'm not good enough to be a Black Panther. I mean, gee whiz. feeding people in the streets in in the early 60s was kind of deadly in Oakland, California. So I was not a Panther, although people see that symbol and they recognize the Black Panther symbol, but they call it Black Power. For Tommy, it was the Olympic project for what rights? Human rights. Civil is a law in certain places. Now, we just changed the laws to represent the Constitution. Everybody in here was born, so that is a human right. So that was my toil through the Olympic project for human rights, dealing with that. And I had to take a symbol to the victory stand to SHOW, my ideas of what a human is going forward. And I wanted to be a school teacher. I became just that because I was kicked out of ROTC. You know I was in ROTC. You
Yeah, they didn't draft you. They didn't draft me. They didn't draft Rap Brown.
They stay away.
Carmichael. They didn't want us.
All the way down. So we went through some things, which I'm proud of the things we went through, so we now could be involved in the continual movement of the brain, of moving forward. No matter how old you are, how color hair you got, you still have a responsibility to those who are still living, coming under you to move forward. Mm-hmm. That's my high school type thing now. I'll get to my PhD thing soon as I eat.
So, Wyoming, can you take us through what was on the ground in Nashville? So you talk a lot about reporters would call your coach and ask you about your opinions, but what was the mood on the ground for the women, and what led you to the place to dedicate your medals in Mexico City?
Well, what was on? Well, for us, being in Nashville, Tennessee, and going to a historical black college, Tennessee State University, and we're talking about the Jim Crow era, growing up in the South and all of that. So for Tennessee State, when I was in school there, it may have had 1,200 students, and but they had this wonderful track team, nothing but women, and they're called the Tiger Bells. And it started with Mr. Temple, who had women on Olympic teams from 1952 to 1984 that went to Tennessee State. And this is a school that had brought home over 23 medals, and 13 of them a gold. And we have countries that can't do that. But this school, and you know, it was, we're talking about human rights. We didn't have it. They weren't giving us, as far as women concerned, they weren't giving us the human rights. They were not saying, you know, we were not saying, oh, you did a great job, and that's about it, and that's how it left us. But when I heard about the movement and all, and how we would hear about it, the reporters would call our coach and say, could we talk to Tyus, or could we talk to Manning? And they're in his class. What you want me to? He never would go and get us, but and they would tell him what was going on at San Jose State, and that's pretty much how we could keep up with what was going on with the movement. And with us, Coach Temple would always say to us, "I can't tell you what to do. It's up to you to do what you want to do. It's if you make the team, if you want to protest, that's up to you. But what I want you to do," the key thing for him was that we had to get the education. And he said, you know, sports are open the door for you, but education would keep the door open. So he was mainly concerned, he was definitely concerned that we did that. And he also was definitely concerned that whatever we as an individual, not as a team, so to speak, because he would not, you know, you had your own mind, you could speak your own mind. He wanted you to do what you felt was right, or how you felt in your heart. And that's it. And I was raised that way. And so when the movement came along and we went to Mexico City, and I can remember very vividly being in the stands, and when I was like in one little pocket where they had all the athletes, and when Tommy and John came out the chute to go onto the victory stand, I'm standing and I see them, and I go, oh, they don't have any shoes on. Oh. And then when they go to the victory stand and they stand up there, and then they start to play the national anthem, and they did the Black Power salute. It was, you know, it was like, oh my goodness. And to me, that's to me, the whole stadium is just silence like it is here. And through the whole thing, and then as we were playing, you could hear talking and rumbling and all of that. And I kept going, oh my gosh, I hope nothing serious happened here, because this is a statement in itself. And it was just mind-blowing for me, and I know for a lot of other people that were there. And when they walked out the victory stand and the boos, and you had a lot of boos, but you also had a lot of people cheering. I was one of them. But but they were, you know, and then after that, we were asked, oh, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? What do you think you're going to do? Well, to me, what Tommy and Carlos had done had made the statement. It's, you know, it's kind of like if you go to a funeral and somebody speaks before the person has to give the eulogy, and that speech was right on, so the person doesn't have to give the eulogy. So, so to me, that's what that was, what they had said. What all we could do, the people that were, the other athletes that wanted to do something, would do the things I mentioned earlier, protest. And people say, you didn't do anything else. I said, what else was there to do? And then even if I did, no one came to talk to me about it, ask me what I wanted to do or how I felt about it. So it was like that. I know that even there's pictures, and you probably won't see them too much. You can look at the pictures of the relay team after they accepted their medals. We all up doing this, but you haven't seen that picture, have you? But there is pictures of that. And but so for me, it's just starting in this day and time that women are really getting the recognition they deserve. And same thing would happen with the movement of human rights, the human rights for women. We're still fighting for it, and we'll continue to.
Yeah. So I think that's a really great place to transition to this wave that we're in now, and to think about the legacy as it reverberates. And we're seeing Colin, of course, but we're also seeing the WNBA players take huge stands, say we're not going to do a press conference about anything but police brutality. We have Serena Williams speaking out very, very vocally about black maternal health. We have pay equality issues. So there's definitely a new wave that we're in. For y'all watching, what is that legacy, and how do we move forward from here? What is happening now?
Well, a lot of this came to the attention of the public with Colin Kaepernick taking the knee in the preseason of the 2016 season. I've been with the San Francisco 49ers for 31 years now. This will be my 32nd year coming up. And Colin and I talked a lot about issues from the 1960s and so forth. He would ask me for books to read, and of course I would suggest books like the autobiography of Malcolm X, most certainly Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, James Baldwin, The Fire Next Time, and of course The Revolt of the Black Athlete. Next thing I know, he's taking a knee. And after he took the first time he took a knee in preseason, I went in and asked him for those shoes. I want that jersey. I want and had him autograph it all, and sent it to the Smithsonian. And when I was asked, well, why did you do that? This is, what do you? I said, because I know where it's going. I've seen it before. The athletes today stand on the shoulders of giants, in the same sense that Tommy and John, Wyoming, most certainly Ali, Bill Russell, Jim Brown, Kurt Flood, Arthur Ashe stood on the shoulders of Jackie Robinson, Larry Doby, and those guys. The reality is that this is an ongoing struggle. The challenges that we face are dynamic and diverse. The struggle, therefore, is perpetual and multifaceted, and there are no final victories. This generation, again, is fighting their battle in that struggle. So when you see LeBron James and Steph Curry, when you see Malcolm Jenkins and Anquan Bolden, when you see Colin Kaepernick taking a knee, what they are saying is it's our time to stand up and make a statement in this regard. And I've been asked many times, what do I say to athletes today when I'm in their presence, which I am a lot because the team travels around. We see these athletes all the time. My answer has always been, I don't say anything to them. I let them know that I stand with them and I listen to what they have to say. Because they're going to do things differently. They're going to express it differently. Their movement is framed up differently. It's not framed up by the Black Power movement. It's framed up by the Black Lives Matter movement. I think that the women inevitably are going to become more active in sports, and it's going to be framed up by the Me Too movement. And I hope that there are a lot of men who are standing up and saying, hey, me too, I got your back, sister, because they've always been there and stood up for us. So today's movement is a continuation of a struggle that goes back to the collapse of Reconstruction and the turn of the century. And it's inevitable, just as inevitable as a fifth wave, as I've stated, is already well this side of the sports political horizon. And campuses and everybody else is going to have to deal with it. Let me give you one example of what I'm talking about. The assaults on Planned Parenthood and Roe v. Wade are an existential threat to women's sports. People talk about women's athletics and Title IX that broaden access by women to collegiate sports activities, scholarships, and so forth. That was 1972. But what they don't mention is 1973 was Roe v. Wade, which gave schools the assurance that if they gave a young lady a scholarship in September, she'd be around in March to play in the Final Four. She'd be around in June to participate in the NCAA track and field meet, or sometime in April to participate in water polo or volleyball tournaments, softball tournaments. With the attacks on Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood, not only are they eliminating, in many instances, making it very, very difficult for women to get the medical services they need in terms of abortions, they're making it difficult for them to get, in many instances, morning after pills, birth control pills, and so forth. With that will come an inevitability of a decline, not just in terms of athletes on campuses and in the WNBA where a lot of the women are married, for example. It will decrease the pool so that there are not a lot of athletes available to get scholarships to begin with. So we're looking very closely at the Institute for the Study of Sports Society and Social Change at San Jose State as what is happening to the women's pool in places like North Carolina, in places like Texas, in places like Mississippi, where some of the steps taken are so draconian that women literally have to drive hundreds of miles even to get morning after pills. This is going to have a tremendous impact on women's sports, and that's something that I think is already well this side of the horizon, and that ultimately there's going to be some response to, probably associated with the Me Too movement and women's rights to safe, equitable treatment, both under the law, no less than under the medical practices and so forth in American society. So these things come in waves. There's a fifth wave coming. These two great athletes were part of the third wave. We're now in a fourth wave that we're now just beginning to understand. But it's a dynamic situation and it's ongoing.
And I think it's really great to point out that Wyoming was one of many athletes, along with Billie Jean King, who founded the Women in Sports Foundation in the wake of after 68 games, and has been on the front lines of figuring out where are women's sports going and what problems are they facing today.
Yeah, that was about 7 of us that really founded the organization, and I think, but now, now it's really just linked to, just as Billie Jean King found it, but it was 7 of us, and it all took place like at a Women's Superstar event, and we were all sitting around talking about what we don't get and what we don't have and all those kinds of things, and then it got to be, well, what can we do about it? And by sitting around talking about it, and then even after the superstars meeting together in certain places and talking about it, and we came up with the whole idea we need to do something to honor women that are doing a great job, and also give young girls and opportunity to see some heroes or sheroes, I would like to say, so they can really have somebody to look up to or admire and all of that. So that's pretty much how the Women's Sports Foundation started. And you were talking about this, also you were talking about even with Title IX, it's a great thing, and everything gets passed, and we have more women involved in sports. But coming from Tennessee State, which is a historical black school, that program, the track program there, because once it was open, all the schools opened up to everybody has to have a women's program, so to speak, then that program became much smaller. The recruiting became very difficult, because if UCLA is recruiting somebody, they're going to go to UCLA and not go to Tennessee State, because they feel they're going to be seen a lot more and a lot more opportunities. And when I was at Tennessee State, that was the only place to be seen as an athlete, because that was the only school at the time giving any type of athletic scholarship. Well, actually, it was work aid, but still, you got to go, and it was free. So Tennessee State, Tuskegee was one of the first ones, and then Tennessee State. But they built women careers, and black women we're speaking of, and they gave young people an opportunity to see what you could do in sports. And then you have Title IX, which also does the same thing, but it does. When you talk about Title IX, it gives almost every woman an opportunity. It doesn't have to be just track. It gives you opportunity in all the sports. So.
Yes. Well, at this time, I would love to open it up to questions in the audience. So we have 2 microphones right here. And if you want to come forward and will you be moderating? Yeah. And you can see Dr. Khan right here. Yeah.
Ed Khan and I will be moderating. So.
Thank you all. It's a privilege to even address you all. Quickly, Brother Smith, what would you have done if I know you was a world-class athlete, so I hope this doesn't sound disrespectful. What would you have done if you hadn't won? And then for Sister Tyus, what was I'm wondering about the relationship in Nashville, because you had SNCC was so prominent in Nashville, and then you had Fisk and TSU, and there's a relationship among those schools in Nashville, especially with respect to women's athletics? Brother Edwards, I got a difficult one for you. One is the academic one.
Mine was first.
I'll try to do each 3. But Brother Edwards, have you ever considered the focus, this academic one, on what you're talking about with sports, and what you go back to your master's thesis, in Harold Cruz's context of a cultural revolution and using sports as this tool to motivate political revolution? He did it focus on the arts, and then but I wonder if you ever contextualize that, for example, in his 67, The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual. But this is the tough one, Brother Edwards, and I'm doing my best to make it respectful. I'm gonna make sure it's respectful. It's bothered me for some time that after organizing this, you didn't go to Mexico. And then when I heard some of the responses, I know things get edited and stuff like that, and some of the response was, well, you were under threats. But then I thought, well, many of the people were under threats. But I hope that the folks will allow, in this context, if you could explain that for us, because that part I never really understood, Brother Edwards.
Okay,
So
let me go first, okay?
All right.
I like first,
Oh.
My plans, and I make pretty good plans sometimes, were not to lose. I ran the race with a strained groin area muscle. I pulled it into semis, slowing down. Okay, okay. Take that one and put it in your brain and push the hard drive button later on. Now, I also have another answer for it. I would have gone home. But what else was there to do? But I wasn't meant to go home. There's a bigger force that got me there than just Tommy Smith, showing off his skinny legs and black socks and fists trying to be Mr. Bad. No way. Holding 11 world records more than any man or woman in track and field history, I didn't have to play to be bad. I was already bad. And so I dealt off of that type power. I worked hard. and practice. I practiced on the track out there at night when nobody was there. So anybody that beat me, I thought, had to work harder than me to beat me. You know, that's it. I hated nobody to beat. I'd shake his hand. I shook a guy's hand before I ran a race, and I was a world record holder. So I gave obedience to respect. I respect man, first of all, which is one man of the universality of life, which is so precious. That's what I did on the victory stand. I continue to do just that. So it was a two-part question. I've answered both of them, so you owe me $1.
I think your question to me was a relationship between Tennessee State, the students that went to Tennessee State and the students at Fisk University. Was that it? Well, as far as, yeah, they were right, well, you can either say they were right up the street and we were right down the street. Both of them was on what they call Jefferson Street Boulevard. And there was some, I think it was a lot of dating both. But as far as sports is concerned, I don't think Fisk had a women's track team at all. And if they had a men's track team, they never competed against Tennessee State. But you met people, because Nashville was very small for black people at that time. You know, we were not going to the Grand Ole Opry and all those kind of things. So we were really like on Jefferson Street and the places, those are the places you could see each other. But yeah, there was some type of relationship with the two schools. And also Meharry University, you know, that's there in Nashville.
And Fisk had a strong internal tension around competitive athletics for women dating back to the 1920s. Yeah. So there was a different legacy at the school for athletics for black women.
Okay, let me say a couple of things before I get to your question. First, there are those of us in the sociology of sport who have an academic commitment to understanding the history and evolution of developments at the interface of sport and human relations, who recognize that it wasn't just Billie Jean King who started this thing. You know, I mean, I remember when they were Time magazine was looking for a face to put on bebop. Even though Duke Ellington was out there, you had Bud Powell out there, you had Thelonious Monk out there, you had Charlie Parker out there, you had Miles Davis and John Coltrane out there. It turned out to be Dave Brubeck because that was the face they wanted to put on it. That was on the cover of Time magazine, and was so egregious that Dave Brubeck called Duke Ellington and said, "Hey man, you should be here." So we recognize that the greatest. They say that the greatest form of flattery is imitation. No, the greatest form of flattery is theft. They just steal it from you. And so when they take it away from you later, you should stand up and take a bow because they just ripping you off. The second thing that I want to say about the statement that you made about the impact of Title IX in terms of giving other opportunities for women athletes to go to places other than Tuskegee and Fisk and Howard and so forth, is that it's truly a wise person that knows the difference between change and progress. Progress in many ways is a concept that's a lot like profit. At some point, it comes down to who's keeping the books. And so even though these historically black schools do not have the same access to blue chip athletes that they once had directly as a result of the progress made in desegregation and so forth, the historically black schools aren't keeping the books. So you've got to continue to tell that story. We paid a price for that. And so let's hope that it was worth it. Everybody has an obligation as a result of that. Let me get to the question that was asked. The first thing about going to, I know I'm cool. The first thing about going to Mexico City is that there was an ideological challenge there because I had advocated for a boycott of Mexico City. For me to go to Mexico City, well, you're advocating for a boycott of Mexico City. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Lucius Allen, and Mike Warren, and a number of other athletes did boycott, and here you are sitting up down in Mexico City. That's the first problem. But an even greater problem was a challenge for me was that I knew and understood. I had a good friend, Louis Lomax, who had some tremendous relationships with the State Department, the FBI, and a number of other government interests. And he had made it very, very clear that they were extremely unhappy about the Olympic Project for Human Rights, because this had delved into international relations. I mean, I was walking up into the United Nations with my dog-eared copy of Frantz Fanon's Wretched of the Earth, talking to people from Ghana and Nigeria and Guinea-Bissau and so forth about boycotting the games over the South African situation. They didn't appreciate that. They made it, Louis Lomax made it very, very clear that if I'm in Mexico City and something went down, they were not only going to come after me, they were going to come after the athletes specifically involved in it, because it would be one way of totally discrediting the Black Power movement. People forget, in 1968, not only did we have presidential candidates and Martin Luther King shot down and living in a decade when Medgar Evers was murdered, living in a decade where 4 weeks after the March on Washington, 4 little girls died in the church that was bombed in Birmingham. We had a number of lynchings, Mac Parker and others across the South. But in Mexico City itself, there were over 1,300 students killed. There were so many students killed that they were literally flying bodies out over the Gulf, dumping them in the ocean in order to avoid mass funerals during the course of the Olympic Games. So there was absolutely no question where the stakes were in terms of me being in Mexico City. If I was not in Mexico City, then Tommy Smith, John Carlos, all the black athletes involved in the Olympic Project for Human Rights became the responsibility of the United States Olympic Committee and the International Olympic Committee. This became Avery Brundage's responsibility, the man who had said, I don't understand why these Negroes are talking about boycotting or demonstrating at the Games, because the Olympic Games are the only platform where Negroes and communists can stand on the same level as other human beings. This was the level of discourse at that time. I was a member of the Black Panther Party. By 1970, there were 69 Black Panthers that had been killed in this country by police and the FBI. When I got my files through the Freedom of Information Act, 3,000 pages, including my dissertation from Cornell University, and I've implored my good buddy, who I have lunch with twice a month, who was the agent in charge of the San Francisco office of the FBI. He and I now have lunch, on a standing appointment for lunch twice a month. I've implored him, could you all please put my dissertation back in the stacks at Cornell University, because they still have it. But 3,000 pages, and one of the things that was in there was that there was an all-points bulletin put out for me immediately after the demonstration in Mexico City. And in point of fact, they didn't ship Tommy and John out immediately. How long were we down there? 2 days?
Yeah, 2 days extra.
2 days after that. And what they were doing during that 2 days was looking for me. But my good friend Louis Lomax had arranged for me to give a lecture at McGill University in Canada and do a TV show where it was actually taped. And so in there also was, we have found that Edwards was in Canada. We cannot put him in Mexico City. And that's why this brother's still here, and that's why I'm still here. So the combination of, one, the contradiction of athletes boycotting the games, and me sitting up in Mexico, and the fact that it wasn't for my own safety. I didn't expect, when white kids would walk around talking about don't trust anybody over 30, people like me and Huey Newton used to laugh because we didn't expect to live to be 30. So it wasn't my safety. I consider myself to be already dead. But it was, what responsibility do I have to these black athletes under circumstances where they could end up being dead and literally discrediting the Black Power movement and that aspect of the movement, period, in this country. I mean, you have to remember, Ali had said, I'm not going to the military. This was serious business. So I couldn't afford to take an ego trip. Well, I'm going down, and so no, I wasn't that stupid. So at the end of the day, I think that the choices that I made were the appropriate choices. I understand the confusion, and I hope that at a minimum, this at least clarifies my perspectives and thinking at the time, even if you don't agree with it.
Hi, Thank you so much for being here. This has been so enlightening to have you amazing people on stage and talking to us about all of this. I am really interested in the shift of terminology that you guys are proposing from civil rights to human rights, because it makes it more international and not just stuck within the realm of the United States. And so I was wondering what the connections were between the student movements in Mexico at the time that were happening, 10 days before the game, where there was that huge massacre and everyone was detained by the government. So what are the connections between that movement and these movements originating in the United States about people of color and especially black athletes?
I just sold it to you.
I'm also interested in, like, were the athletes aware of what was happening in Mexico? Like, what was the sense of awareness among international teams, and just in general, like, what kind of publicity in the media did those movements get or not? And what are the connections there?
Well, let me I'm gonna try to be very, very brief on this. There were two international connections that we made directly as a consequence of our emphasis on human rights. One was with Nelson Mandela's ANC South African Non-Racial Sports Committee, which was pushing for the de-racialization of the South African Olympic team. We had direct contact with them. We supported them. We developed a poster on that movement. If you look in the Revolt of the Black Athlete, there's a picture of that poster in there with Smith on it. It was such a powerful statement of support for that effort in South Africa that Nelson Mandela had a copy of that poster along with a photo of Smith and Carlos on the victory stand smuggled into his prison cell on Robben Island. If you look at the December 6, 2013 New York Times Sports Friday, you'll see as part of the obituary that they put in there, they put it on the sports page, was Mandela's statement of his debt to the Olympic Project for Human Rights for leading him in that direction. So that was one connection. The other thing that had happened was the student movement in Mexico called me and asked for our support. And of course, I immediately gave that support, as well as communicating their concerns to H. Rap Brown and Stokely Carmichael of SNCC and Huey Newton of the Black Panther Party, so that they would be aware of what was going on in Mexico City. I was not aware of the extent of carnage that took place until after it had happened, and people that I knew who were in the movement in Mexico began to call me and say, hey, they opened fire on the dormitory on the campus in Mexico City, and they killed 300 and some students. And of course, what they were trying to do was to avoid demonstrations in the streets during the Olympic Games. So there was a direct connection there. There was some support there, but it wasn't really until the Games was over that we learned of the full extent of carnage that had taken place, with fishnets full of bodies being flown out over the Gulf and dumped in order to avoid mass funerals in Mexico City during the Games.
Thank you.
So this question is in particular for Dr. Edwards. So you do your work in the sociology of sport is obviously very. I'm sorry, you want to speak into the. We can't hear you. Sorry, sorry, I'm nervous.
Don't be scared, bro. I mean, you in good company.
It's not every day you talk to gold medalists. So your work in sociology of sport is obviously commendable. So what role would you say that sports has in the raising of young boys in America, and in particular for young boys of color? And in addition to that, where do you see the culture of sports in the United States today taking future generations of boys and girls?
Well, I think sport is an integral institutional dimension of American culture and society. As such, it carries all of the benefits and all of the drawbacks of that situation. There's a lot that can be taught in sport and through sport, and unfortunately there's a lot in sport that has to be negated in that effort. I think that a lot of the toxic, malignant masculinity that we see expressed in American society, not just in terms of the fact that the overwhelming majority of mass shooters have been males, not just in terms of the overwhelming majority of killers in the African American community have been males, not just in terms of the fact that the #1 cause of death for African American women ages 15 through 34 is death at the hands of significant others, intimates in their lives. It's the #1 cause of death in that age group of African American women. A lot of that toxic, malignant masculinity is also reflected in sports. And it begins with such comments as, you run like a girl, or you throw like a girl, or I'm gonna put a dress on you, or he bitched you, or all that kind of nonsense is part of that toxic masculinity that unfortunately you find in sport, in the locker room, which is, has evolved as despite all of the advances that women have made in sports, it has evolved. Sport in American society and Western culture has evolved as a homosocial environment, as they say, a man's world. And a lot of that has to be countered, especially going forward. I'm convinced that the #1 human rights problem in American society today does not take place at the interface of race and society. It takes place in terms of gender and society. The status, outcomes, and circumstances of girls and women is the #1 human rights challenge in this country. And it is a man's problem. Women can stand up and say, me too, but men have to stand up with women in that regard. It's a man's problem. If every man in this society, or even a significant proportion, decided at breakfast that we're going to stop beating, slapping, kicking, humiliating, assaulting, offending, and so forth, women and girls at breakfast, that's a problem that could be solved by lunchtime, and it wouldn't take any more police, no more legislation, wouldn't take any judges' edicts, or any of that kind of stuff. But at some point, somebody has to stand up and say, when somebody drops an H-bomb or a B-bomb or something like that on a woman, somebody has to stand up and say, don't say that, brother. You're not saying anything about her. You're making a resume statement about yourself. And at that point, when a significant enough group of men stand up and begin to say that, like black athletes who have the biggest megaphone, the highest forum in the country, when they stand up and begin to say that, we'll begin to see some changes because people listen to athletes. I spoke to a group of 200 minority young men ages about 10 to 12, 13, and I told them at a summer camp, you can be one of 3 people. You can be Steph Curry, LeBron James, or Barack Obama, who at that time was president of the United States. You can be one of them. You can't be all 3 of them. You can just be one of them. Okay, how many want to be Barack Obama? 3 hands went up. How many want to be Steph Curry? Every hand went up. You know, how many people want to be LeBron? I said, no, you can't be both of them, just got to be one of them. So athletes have a heck of a megaphone, and they are also the models for masculinity in American society. We have to change and challenge this toxic, malignant masculinity that is at the very core of a lot of problems that we have. And these are men's problems, not women's problems. Me too, women can say what they're not going to put up with. It's men who have to change what they have to put up with because it is a situation that we have largely created.
Now, Harry back then, we called him Harry, Dr. Edwards now, he, San Jose State basketball. He was a senior when I was a freshman. We heard similar arguments from him then, like now. Only it was different category, mostly athletic now, instead of political sociology. That's why I became so smart.
I'm not taking the rap for this one.
Dr. Blackett?
Thank all of you for being here. One of the things I was hoping that all three of you can contextualize, when this was going on, this was a hot moment of the Cold War. And the 1968 games, if we look in hindsight, are considered part of the Cold War games. And in essence, those athletes who wanted to boycott or talked about boycott were labeled unpatriotic. I was wondering what effect did that pressure of being labeled unpatriotic have on you and your decisions to boycott, and afterwards, since you protested, if you could talk about that, all three of you, because I imagine you also had to make the decision about what to do at the games.
Okay. Now, we were organized. This wasn't a haphazard situation where a brother would go out and pull a red handkerchief out and say, I'm cool because I got a red handkerchief. It wasn't about that. We decided to do certain things as a group, a recognized group. Now, we knew that there were going to be difficulties in those doing what some could do. You know, you had, like you said earlier, people in the military and people doing other things, even people with the minds of, I can't pass this up because this is the only chance I have to do what I wanted to do. So the sacrifice was there, but not enough of the sacrifice they were willing to give. Now, it was decided, one of the last meetings we had en route to Mexico City, we talked about this earlier today, it was decided that there would not be a boycott because of certain issues. But we worked together up until that date, one of the last meetings, just before we heard from Jesse Owens, who the Olympic Committee sent to try to tell us a different story. We haven't talked about that one. But it was decided by the athletes that each athlete would represent himself according to how he felt a country represented them. So that gave all the athletes the liberty, not freedom, but the liberty to do or not do. So the guys in the Army were glad. I was glad. The whole team was glad. So we went out and got haircuts. In fact, the high jumper, what's his name? Who was young on the team?
Ronaldo Brown.
Ronaldo Brown, who was 17, still owed me $5 because I gave him that for a haircut. So we were a happy group dealing with situations which could cause myocardial infarctions or a simple heart attack because there was so much pressure. But what John, Carlos, and Tommy Smith did represented the beginning of a movement that will last forever, because where was it started? At John, Carlos, and Tommy Smith School. Bagged by a professor who was there earlier, went to Cornell, came back with a degree, and taught a class, which I took. So this is a pride for me. I mean, y'all know how verbose he is and talk, and he can pick a word up and sell it to you because it's true, you know. Buy it if he does buy it because it's good stuff. And I still have one of his books. I think probably the first one, or sitting right beside Kirk Flood's book in my downstairs office. It was The Sociology of Sport. Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of his earlier books. I mean, I keep bringing his name up because it's a pride for me. It's one of those things that I'm older than he, but I went one direction, and he went another direction, and we're both pretty good in society. You know, that's why I can sit here and listen to him all day, because he does what I don't do. You know, he does what I can't do. And I do some things that he can't do. In fact,
I couldn't run out of sight if you gave me all day. But you were the greatest sprinter in history. Go ahead.
You keep saying the greatest sprinter in history.
We have to say in 68.
Pound for pound. You know?
Okay. But we should say in 68, when you went back to back, people thought that couldn't happen in the 100 meters.
Right.
You're the first person, man, woman, black or white, to go back to back.
Yes. When we talk about being unpatriotic, I mean, that was something that we didn't see. We still talk about human rights, and it's unpatriotic to be disrespect humans, as that's said, and not give them the freedom or have the same freedoms that everybody has. I was under a great man, Coach Ed Temple. Well, I call him Mr. Temple, so when I'm speaking of him, and he taught us as black women that we had to be proud of who we are. We have to stand up for what we feel is right, and that is standing up for, it's our conviction, it's what we want to do. He would say to, you know, there are certain things people do, but that doesn't mean you have to do it. If that's not what you believe in, or that's not your way of doing things, then you have to do how you feel, do it the way you feel. And if it's but you also have to be ready to be able to explain yourself, talk about it, or make sure everybody know where you're coming from. Because a lot of times people take your point and not really get the message, and you want them to have the true message of where you are and where you're coming from. And he taught us these things, and I think about, you know, he had this women's track team, and he was able to take all these women and put them on a team and when you think of track, it's not a team. You think of individual, but he made us feel that we were a team and that we had to always look out for each other. Not so much monetarily, but, you know, make sure we're guiding the people, talking about issues and things that affect you and how you would like this team to be looked at years from now. So that's pretty much. And when we talk about being unpatriotic, he would always say, well, you can go to Europe and they love you, and you come back here and you don't get any respect. So who's unpatriotic here? So that's my take on that.
I think, and we have time for 2 more questions.
Okay. Let me address this really quickly. First of all, there's never been a protest movement by African Americans in this country where the American mainstream has stood up and said amen. We agree with that protest. They call it a protest rather than a picnic because you don't get applause and a bunch of kudos when you do it. You're protesting against something. The second thing is that I've never been worried about the notion of being called unpatriotic, because unpatriotic means that you do not defend and support and act in accordance with the United States Constitution and its mandates. When I look and see that we're supposed to have access to the United States constitutional guarantees, the first 10 amendments of the United States Constitution and so forth, but you go places and you can't vote. You go places and you can't eat. You go to hotels that you can't live in. Your leaders are being shot down in broad open daylight. Your children are being dribbled down the sidewalk like basketballs with fire hoses. They're being beaten for wanting to get a better education. You can't tell me anything. That's unpatriotic. And you see that right up through today. People talking about what Colin Kaepernick did was unpatriotic. And I keep explaining. It's not anything about him taking a knee during the playing of the national anthem. These people don't even know the words to the national anthem. The average one couldn't sing the words to the national anthem. And if they're sitting at home rather than in the stadium, they don't stand up and recognize the national anthem. When they play the national anthem, they go to the refrigerator so that they don't have to miss any of the game to feed their face, to get that extra beer. They would have been against what Kaepernick did if Kaepernick had been on the sidewalk taking a knee before the game to the playing of chopsticks, because it's not what he was doing during the national anthem. It's the fact that he was protesting the circumstances in this country which mainstream America has never wanted to hear. This is why I don't care what the demonstration was. I don't care how nonviolent it was. I don't care how respectful it was. I don't care how silent it was. I don't care where it was. It could be in Mexico City. It could be in the stadium in San Francisco. It could be anywhere. But if they're protesting racism, discrimination, the murder of black men, women, and children in this country, there's a problem with it. It's unpatriotic. If it happens abroad, you're washing our dirty laundry. abroad. If it happens here, how dare you do that during the playing of the national anthem? It doesn't matter. It doesn't make any difference. So when people accuse me, well, you're doing something in the height of the Cold War that the Russians and the Chinese are going to use against us, I said, well, hell, stop doing what you're doing to me. You know? And so I never was, I consider myself to be more patriotic than the average president that's been in the White House.
So we have time for 2 more questions. So can we actually take them both, and then we can answer them and culminate?
Sure. So we are here today, obviously, at Penn State, one of the largest sports schools in the country. We have athletes here who are celebrities in their own right. I'm wondering what you would say to them, what advice you might have for them as people who have used your voices and kind of gone through this and come out the other side, so to speak. You know, what you might say to college athletes out there now.
Okay, so a number of my questions have been sprinkled in earlier, but I would love to know from you, Ms. Wyomia, what your memoirs might add to that part of the conversation as we are thinking about legacy and sport and activism and women and all of those things.
And as you can see,
pound for pound, I'm the greatest
and
friend
as
in the
you
world.
can see, the memoir is premiering tonight here, right outside.
Premier, right?
Yeah.
Well, on the memoir issue, I have just finished my memoirs along with my co-writer, who is Elizabeth, who's right here in the front row. Elizabeth. I had to be convinced to do this because I never felt that I had a story to tell. I felt that it was just, I was doing what I knew was best for me and the people around me, and what would be best for the world, in which, if I had children at the time, it would have been best, the world would be a better place when they got here. So that's pretty much what my memoir, that's why I didn't feel like I was a person that was an advocate doing this. It was just me doing what I think is right and what I was taught is right. And so my memoirs are it's called Tiger Bell, the Wyoming Tiger story, and it talks a lot about Tennessee, the Tiger Bells at Tennessee State, and it talks about how it made me who I am today, and it gave me the opportunity to feel free to share that with the world, and hopefully all of you go out there and buy that.
Buy the hardcover.
So as a last question, what would you say to athletes today, particularly at colleges everywhere, but particularly here at Penn State, to encourage them to use their voice? Yep.
I would tell athletes, after I listened to what they had to say, to hold on to their dreams, but to learn to dream with their eyes open. They're going to run into obstacles off the field and on the field that are not written into the regulations and so forth of the sport. They have to hold on to their dreams, but learn to dream with their eyes open. Also, understand that the challenges that they face are not going to be remedied by time. Time is neutral. Therefore, it's critically important that they do their homework, that they understand that there's always more to be learned and understood about this high-profile, volatile world that you are living in. And it won't last forever, but while you're in it, you have to have a roadmap to where you want to go and what your responsibilities are while you're there. So learn to dream with your eyes open and do your homework.
Continue to that, not what he said, but continuing to that. You got to have faith in what you do. Continuance. Faith is that subject of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. But without work, faith is what? Dead. So make sure that you continue the work and don't just do it, put your hands in your pocket and play pocket pool. And you're going to miss the right hole.
The part for me would be that you have to also remember that you're in a fight. And you can't. You must continue to fight and then fight, and you must continue to believe in yourself. And you must continue to believe that you definitely have something to offer the world, help it change to be a better world for all of us in which to live.
Well, I thank y'all for coming out today. Outside after this, we'll have stations so you can come buy the book, meet them in person, get some autographs. And on the behalf of the College of Liberal Arts, Department of History, Department of African American Studies, Sawyer Seminar on Racial Disposability and Cultures of Resistance, thank you, and please join me in thanking Wyoming College, Tommy Smith, and Dr. Barry Edwards. All right.